Oh, yeah. Tammy, we're waiting for the all-powerful mic. Oh, there he is. Daily Bible readers, if you would raise your hand. And then Barry has, I've got that loud. Barry has a handful of books. We're starting in a new quarterly this morning. So if you'll raise your hand, he'll get one to you. While he's getting more books, let's pray before we start. Dear Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this day, and we thank you for the blessings that you give us every day of our lives. We thank you now especially for our freedom to be able to come here and to study your word unmolested and without anyone threatening us. Please be with us this morning. Help us to study hard and remember things that we've learned here this morning and put into our lives. Help us to be the Christian people we need to be as we go through our daily lives. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now this morning, we're starting a new quarterly, as I said. 2 quarters ago, you know, these studies swap between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Well, last quarter we studied Mark, New Testament. 2 quarters ago we were studying the book of Judges out of the Old Testament. Joshua out of the Old Testament. Too many J's. And the study of Joshua was pretty uplifting, because Joshua was a good, strong leader. For the most part, they being the children of Israel, were wise enough to consult God. And then the lesson I think that we learned out of studying them is that they learned that as long as they would follow God's commands, He would protect them. He would keep them close. Things went well for them. But they also learned when they didn't. Seems like it was the second lesson we had in Joshua. They went to attack a city, but they hadn't asked God if that was what they were supposed to do, and they didn't win that battle. They lost people in the battle. But later, they went back and asked God, and with His planning, with His permission, it worked out. So Joshua was a pretty uplifting book. Judges is going to be a little different. Judges, well, let me just read you what the quarterly said. The theme of Judges, which is the book we're studying, obviously, there's a statement that's mentioned 3 different times in Judges, and this is basically the theme, the underlying message of Judges, or at least the underlying situation. In those days there was no king in Israel, Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. We're going to read that eventually in Joshua 17:6, Joshua 18:1, Joshua 21:25. Now, not many people complain about their government as badly as I do. But imagine what this world would be like, what this country would be like, if it was just anarchy, if everybody just did what was right in their own eyes. If there were no traffic laws, why do I drive on the right side of the road? You know, I've known people. Walter Glenn one time took a trip to Europe and they rented a car. Can you imagine driving on the left side of the road? You know, that would take a little getting used to. I've got a nephew right now that's going to Japan to do something for one of Nissan's subsidiaries. He's an engineer and he's learning whatever it is they do. And he's going to be over there for 2 years, and they rented him a car as soon as he came. Can you imagine the adjustment to sitting on the right side of the car and driving on the left side? You know, if there weren't rules to follow, this would be a dangerous, dangerous place. And that's what the time of the judges essentially are. Every man decided on his own what was right, what was fair. And as we're going to read through this quarter, there's some tough things that come up because of it. Now, we've read and we've studied. We know how studying the Israelites is. They're up and they're down. They're trying to do everything they can to do right, and then the next generation comes along and they've got 15 idols that they worship. So we're used to that. We've read about the Israelites being led by Moses out of Egypt, and then of course through the wilderness. We studied Joshua's leadership as he led them into the promised land. And as far as we were concerned, when we finished off Joshua, he had conquered the promised land. He had conquered Canaan. But they by no means drove everyone out, which is what the initial command was. And because of that, we know that they're going to suffer over and over because of it. We even read, I want to point out before we get into the lesson today, we even read back in Joshua 10 about them capturing, maybe a better word, the king of Jerusalem. And we're going to talk more about Jerusalem because it's in the text this morning. But we're going to talk more about it and how they didn't complete the mission. They didn't completely wipe out the people of Jerusalem, and it came back to haunt them because of that. Now, let's read the first half of our text. It's Judges 1, and we're going to read down through verse 7. It's on page 7 in the quarterly if you're trying to read it out of the quarterly, or if you're reading it out of the Bible, it's Judges 1 through 7. Now after the death of Joshua, it came to pass that the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, Who shall be first to go up for us against the Canaanites to fight against them? Now think about where we are. One more time. Joshua has died. Joshua has been leading them. These people are used to being led and told where to go and told where to stand and when to pack up and go. Moses did it in the wilderness. Then Joshua stepped up and he took care of it afterward and led them into the promised land. So they're looking around at each other and they're saying, okay, who's going to be the leader now? Who's going to tell us what to do? So apparently they have this national meeting of some kind. I don't know how, but somehow they all got together. And the question is posed to God, what do we do? Who's going to go up for us to fight the Canaanites? And the authors of this book made a big point about the Canaanites basically meant the people who lived in Canaan. And I thought, well, that makes sense. But the reason they bring it up, or they brought it up and they talk about it more and more, is we're going to read about the Perizzites and the Jebusites and a bunch of ites. But basically there were Canaan, the promised land, was made up of lots of cities, not necessarily what we think of as a single country, but that's the way the Israelites viewed it because they wanted that area. They wanted that land mass. So anyway, when we hear the word Canaanites, it was just somebody who apparently was in Canaan. And he even talked about it might have been some of the people who lived north of what was considered the promised land who would come into Canaan and attack the Israelites from time to time. I don't know why that's important, but it pointed out, so I have too. Now, verse 2. And the Lord said, Judah shall go up. So out of the 12 tribes, he chose Judah. And he sends them to go. Remember, we read back in Joshua, going back to Joshua again, we've already read how the inheritances were divided up. The areas were already decided among the Israelite people. But now it's time to go in there and clean out whoever's left there. So that's what they're asking is who's going to lead us? Who should go first? So God chooses the tribe of Judah. You all go south of, it's going to end up being, if we read further, the southern area, south of Judah. Go into that hill country. You get rid of those people, and that's going to be your area. So Judah, the tribe, we talk about him like it's a person, but in this case it's the tribe of Judah, asks the tribe of Simeon, you all go along with us, because it works out they're their neighbor anyway. So we're all going to go attack these people. Verse 3, so Judah said to Simeon his brother, come up with me to my allotted territory that we may fight against the Canaanites, and I will likewise go with you to your allotted territory. And Simeon went with him. Then Judah went up, and the Lord delivered the Canaanites and the Perizzites into their land, and they killed 10,000 men at Bezek. And they found Adoni-Bezek in Bezek, and fought against him, and they defeated the Canaanites and the Perizzites. Then Adoni-Bezek fled, and they pursued him, and they caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. And Adoni-Bezek said, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off used to gather scraps under my table. As I have done, so God has repaid me. Then they brought him to Jerusalem, and there he died. Excuse me. So they go, they attack this country. They win the battle. The leader of apparently this city, Bezek, one of the authors pointed out that Adoni just basically meant leader. So his name was leader of Bezek. A whole lot like we used to have a dog and we called it Puppy. You know those bright names that you come up with? Well, that's what this is apparently. But anyway, they chase him down. They've already killed 10,000 of his people. They chase him down and they catch him. And I can't tell if he was bragging or complaining, but he says to them, you know, I, over my lifetime, captured 70 kings, and I cut off their big toes and their thumbs and made them eat at my table. In other words, I had to provide for them. They were completely dependent on me. And now God has turned the tables, and he's made that same happenstance happen to me. So that was the result. He was paid because he apparently treated these other people that way. And that's one of the things I want to point out. You know, we get to reading these stories and I get to thinking about them almost like they were comic book heroes, like they weren't real people. But I want to point out that this Adoni-Bezek was not a good man. He went into... We think of these places as being countries, but literally they were just cities. They would go in and capture the king. We might have thought of him as a mayor, whatever. He was the leader of this town, and he would take him and he would bring him back to Bezek apparently, cut off his thumbs, cut off his big toes, and forced him to be a slave apparently. He was completely dependent. Said they ate under their table. So they were dependent completely to Adoni-Bezek for their survival. This was not a good man. I'm not sure we would have thought that the children of Israel were good people. These were vicious people. This was a vicious time. They didn't think anything about getting Adoni-Bezek and cutting his toes off and his thumbs off. So... you know, it was a different time than what we're used to. we think we're more civilized now. And maybe we're not. That stuff may be going on and we just don't know it. Maybe we're more naive. But it was a tough time. One of the points here, and this is completely off the lesson, the authors didn't mention this, but the reason I bring that up is God used people who weren't the best people in the world. I've been reading, in my personal Bible reading, I've been reading Daniel and studying, of course, Nebuchadnezzar and those people. And Nebuchadnezzar was not a good man. But God used Nebuchadnezzar to punish Israel. When we read about Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, they were slaves. Now, they excelled where they were. And that's a great thing, and I guess there's a great lesson to be learned there. But they had a tough life. But I don't understand. We as humans tend to be so black and white in our thinking. We think of, well, the Israelites were the good guys, and the other guys were the bad guys, and God's on the side of good, and evil's over there. But God used Nebuchadnezzar, even though Nebuchadnezzar was an evil man. Think about Pharaoh. We've talked before around this, and I don't know that there is an answer, but the term God hardened Pharaoh's heart bothers me a little bit. I don't understand all that means. God's not evil. God doesn't make a man sin. So He didn't, I don't believe He made Pharaoh do what he did, but He may have kept him from changing his mind or giving in as quickly as he would have. I don't know what all that means. But anyway, I just want to point out that God uses imperfect people, and maybe there ought to be a little comfort for us in that thing, because we're far from perfect people too. So anyway, there's
all these. It's hard sometimes to even see that they all aren't bad from time to time. And of course, spiritually, you look at all of us today, and basically, even Christ said there's none good but one. So when you use God's measuring stick, we all fall short and we're all sinners. And when it boils down to it, what comforts me or doesn't comfort me sometimes is that it all boils down to just who's obeying and who's not obeying. Because really there isn't any good or evil. God had already told them to go in there and wipe them all out. Now to us, that's just a word. But they were to take the edge of the sword and kill men and women and children and livestock and everything. And we know this because of the stories, when Saul, even after this, when Saul didn't obey what God said, he got punished. And when you boil right down to it, who's obeying? Now Joshua's gone, and Joshua was pretty good about obeying. He was one of the spies, he and Caleb, and all those died in the wilderness except for two. They were all left behind with those two. And so, and even Joshua had trouble completely and utterly destroying all these Canaanites, and the ones left are going to have the same problem, and these are going to be the thorn that's going to always be in the side of the Israelites from now on.
And a lot of their sins can be blamed back to those people.
Right.
Truth be known. Now let's look at verses 7 through 10. Well, I read 7. Let's read 8 through 10. Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem and took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword, and they set the city on fire. Now remember, this is the second time. We've already read that they captured the king of Jerusalem back in Joshua. Now here they've come against Jerusalem again, and they struck it with the edge of the sword, and they set the city on fire. And afterward the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. Then Judah went up against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba, and they killed, and I really don't do well with these words, but I'm going to try them. they killed Shisha, Ahiman, and Talmai. And we're going to talk in a minute why Johnny at least thinks why they brought these names up. So, what seemed to be a total victory in Jerusalem, they go back again to verse 8. They fought against Jerusalem, they struck it with the edge of the sword, and they set the city on fire. You would think that's a victory, that they've won. But apparently they didn't move into Jerusalem, or if they did, they didn't move in with an overwhelming force, because we're going to read again later in 2 Samuel 5, verses 6 through 9, where David had to conquer Jerusalem again. We think about Jerusalem as being the city of David, but it wasn't the city of David at this time. David wasn't here yet, first off, but they conquered it once, conquered the king at least, and then now here they are, they've captured Jerusalem again and burned it this time. But again later, 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 9, David's going to lead an army and take Jerusalem again. So I'm not sure what all went on with Jerusalem, but it took a while for them to take full control, I guess, of Jerusalem. Now, remember the sequence of God's dealing with His leaders. He first started with the patriarchs. He was talking to them directly. So when Abraham wondered where to go, he would ask God. God would lead him. Same thing, he comes on down through Moses. And he tells Moses, you take my people out of Egypt. They go through the 10 plagues. He leads them out. Remember Barry talked just a second ago about he sends the spies into the promised land. All the spies had to do was come back and say, it's great. They've got these huge grapes. They've got houses that we can move into. All we've got to do is move on in. And I believe that they could have done that very day. God would have led them on into Canaan then. But instead, 10 of the 12 spies come back and say, no, there's giants in that land. We can't take it. So because of that, because of the doubt of the people, God leads them through the wilderness, just around in circles basically, for 40 years until that whole doubting generation dies off. Everybody but Joshua and Caleb, and you know why I'm bringing up Caleb. We're going to get to him in a minute. All of them die off. Then they get to go into the promised land. Joshua leads them in. So that's where we are. Later, the people will come back, and I'm talking about the people of Israel, will come back and they'll tell God, we're tired of these judges. And after we've studied through Judges, you'll see why they got tired of judges pretty quick. We're tired of these judges. We want kings to lead us like other countries have. And God explains to them, you know the story, God explains to them why you don't want kings. They're going to make you pay tribute. They're going to make you serve them. But eventually that's where they go. So, after attacking Jerusalem, Judah and Simeon attacked Hebron. That's in verse 10. And it's here that we read about the sons of Anak. That's who these 3 men were. If you look in Numbers 13:33, the Bible refers to Anak as the father of giants. So that's why Johnny thinks, at least, that he singled out these 3 men, because apparently they were giants. They were great fighting machines, maybe. I don't know. But according to Joshua 15:14, the names that I couldn't pronounce well were the sons of Anak. So again, I assume they were giants. Anak means father of giants. In Numbers 13:30, if you go back there, you'll see where the 12 spies come back to Moses and they're reporting to the people, here's what we found. And Numbers 13:30 is where Joshua and Caleb spoke up and said that they were unafraid, and they advised Moses, let's take the country right now while God's willing to give it to us. But they didn't. When it came time for action, though, and we're going to read in the next few verses, Caleb aggressively and fearlessly seized what the Lord guaranteed him. Remember, we've already been through, in Joshua, we've been through who's going to get what lands. Caleb has been promised this land south of Jerusalem. So he's willing to lead his tribe, the people that would follow him, to take this. Now look in verse 11 through 15. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kirjath-Sepher. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath-Sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter, I think it's Asa, Aisha, as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So he gave his daughter Asa as wife. Now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you wish? So she said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me the land in the south. Give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and lower springs. Now, I'm not positive why that's important to point out, but I'll show you my opinion in a minute when we get down to that. This Debir must have been a formidable city, because he was willing to give his daughter, his child, to whoever would lead the army and take this city. And his own nephew is the one who speaks up and leads the battle. And he does take it. He's successful. Caleb's nephew, named Othniel, captured the city and set the stage for him to become Israel's first judge. In 2 weeks, we're going to study and we're going to read in Joshua 3, 9 through 11, where this Othniel becomes Israel's first judge. So we're talking about Othniel a little bit today, just kind of as a side story, but he becomes the star 2 weeks from now. And apparently he is brave. He must be a good soldier, because he wins the battle. But the daughter, Asa, speaks up and says, okay, if you're going to give us this land, then we also want water to go with it. Think about it. This is desert area. They needed the water just to make the land profitable at all or useful at all. If we go back to Joshua 15, verses 16 through 19, it says almost the same thing I read to you just out of the last few verses of our text this morning. Joshua 15, 16 through 19. And Caleb said, again, he's trying to get up the battle. And Caleb said, the one who attacks Kiriath-Sepher and captures it, I will give him Asa, my daughter, as a wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it, so he gave him Asa, his daughter, as a wife. It came about that when she came to him, talking about coming to Othniel, she persuaded him to ask her father for a field. So she alighted from the donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? Then she said, give me a blessing. Since you have given me the land of Negev, also give me the springs of water. And he gave her the upper and lower springs. It's just two versions of the same story, basically. Real quickly now, I'm about to run out of time. God did all this. I don't want to give the impression that he was just rocking along and dealing with Israel just as they came up. This was all part of a bigger plan. The conquest of Canaan and the period of the judges were stages in Israel's long history as a people. He had to have the chosen people. It all is leading to Christ, which is leading to, thankfully for that, we've got a second opportunity. We've got a chance to go to heaven because we're sinners, and we're not going to get beyond being sinners. If God didn't offer us a second way to be forgiven, we wouldn't have a chance. But this was all part of the big plan. It was a long plan that was carried out. He might save the world from sin by sending His Son. With the coming of Christ, God unveiled the mystery hidden from ages past. God's plan all along had been to prepare Israel so that through them He might save the world. Ephesians 3, 5 through 6. Sometimes God worked with judges. Sometimes He worked with kings. Again, He worked with the patriarchs. in our case, we have the Bible to go by. That's where the rules are written out for us. That's who we can consult and how we can know what God wanted us to do. But he was always directing the nation toward the coming of the Christ and the salvation of the human family. Okay, I appreciate you being here, and sorry I had to rush through that last part.